So if you want to live a peaceful life in the here and now for a little while, I'm starting to remind myself of William Wallace here. Because he almost said that I was almost about to go into the same thing. I better not. Big plagiarism. But anyhow, maybe I'll watch that movie one too many times. But if you don't want to stay in violence and you're not satisfied with that, you run the risk of being labeled in this post-September the 11th, 2001 world, the day that everything changed. Forever. Well, you run the risk of being labeled today a domestic terrorist. A domestic terrorist. You have no legal protection against such a designation. Why? Because the USA Patriot Act and similar legislation say so. That same that. Have any of you ever actually read the definition of a domestic terrorist in the USA Patriot Act? Yeah. Well, we've got 3 or 4 more people in here that have read it than Congress. But seriously, if you haven't read it, go back and read it. Particularly that part that defines what a domestic terrorist. My friend, we and pretty much everybody else in this country are domestic terrorists. They will give you no peace. They will give you no quarter. Well, I won't put too fine a point on this, but you no longer live in the country that most of your fellow Americans think that you live in, a federated constitutional republic. You don't live in that anymore. That's gone. People who talk about the Constitution may as well be talking about Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's gone. It's extinct. And I'll tell you why. Because John C. Calhoun said that the Constitution is not a self-enforcing document. And he summed it up in these words: only power can check power. And what he meant was this: that piece of paper is worthless unless you are willing to enforce it on those on whom it was meant to be enforced. If you don't enforce it, they will break the bargain. And they will do it with seeming impunity. And they will laugh in your face when you bring up to them that something is unconstitutional. Basically, they laugh in your face and say, what are you going to do about it? And our response has been to mumble and walk away and say, in effect, nothing. And that's exactly what they want, is for you to feel fearful and helpless. You now live against your will in an empire. A godless empire that seeks to do to the world in the 21st century what it imposed upon our southern ancestors 140 years ago. It's just doing a bigger job of reconstruction here. The sooner you realize that fact, then the sooner you and your neighbors and your friends and your families can begin to do something about it. Play acting and pretending that we live in a constitutional federated republic just isn't going to get you anywhere. Appealing to a piece of paper which the current president has referred to as a GD piece of paper, is going to do no good. Because in his eyes and in his successor's eyes, that is all it will be, is a worthless piece of paper. Still, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, many Americans, even many of our fellow Southerners, insist that reforming the system is possible and desirable. We spent in June of 1994, when we were forming the League, we had two factions in the room. We had one faction that was the Southern Nationalist faction, who wanted the League's mission to be an independent South. And we had another group that lined up against the other wall who wanted to seek to reform the system. They got run out of the room in 15 minutes. Because we knew that this God-forsaken monstrosity was not reformable 14 years ago. And it sure as hell ain't reformable today. How are you going to reform a system when every institution of reform that is recognized in this country is either controlled by or submissive to the regime that is to be the subject of reform? On any meaningful issue, do we expect the Congress of the Supreme Court, for instance, to side with the people and against the regime of which it is a component part? No. It's not going to kill itself. And if it has to live by sucking the life out of you, that's what it will do. It's not going to kill itself. Do we expect in this early 21st century for our emasculated state governments to stand firm in our favor against their own paymasters in Washington, D.C.? No. Our state governments are made up of littler men than make up D.C. They're just D.C. wanted. They're not going to do anything for you because you don't pay them. Oh, you may still live in the 12th grade civics textbook world of how the government works and who the servants are and who the masters are and who the constituents are and all this, but that's no longer reality if it ever was to start with. Your state governments, as they are now constituted, are nothing but your junior enemies, for the most part. If the right men were in office, they could be our friends, our bulwark against intrusion from D.C., but as they're duly constituted right now, they are not. In other words, as things stand now, we, the Southern people, have no recourse if we continue to operate within a system that is well beyond our control and influence. And if we insist on continuing to operate within it, we will get exactly what we deserve, which is nothing. Nothing.